How China is upgrading its air bases to prepare for war with Taiwan. What are the chances that China will start a war? Possibly the single most important question in the realm of world relations at the moment is this one. If China were to employ military force against Taiwan or another target in the Western Pacific, the result may be war with the United States. This would be a conflict between two nuclear-armed powers who are competing for hegemony in that region and the wider world. It would be a worldwide inferno, unlike anything that has occurred since World War II, if China launched an attack amid ongoing crises in Ukraine and the Middle East. This would cause the world to be engulfed by interlocking conflicts across Eurasia's critical regions. What kind of concern should we have? Despite the recent flurry of high-level diplomacy that has taken place between Washington and Beijing, the warning signs are undeniably present. Beijing is accumulating ships, planes, and missiles as part of the greatest military buildup by any country in decades. This is something that is happening under the leadership of Chinese President Xi Jinping. China has been hoarding gasoline and food and is attempting to limit the vulnerability of its economy to sanctions. These are activities that one might take as a conflict is getting closer. Despite some recent efforts to attract back hesitant global investment, China is doing these things. China needs to be ready to face high winds, choppy waters, and even dangerous storms, according to Xi Jinping, who had stated that the country needs to prepare for worst-case and extreme scenarios. As a result of all of this, Beijing has grown increasingly coercive and occasionally violent in its dealings with its neighbors, such as the Philippines, Japan, and India, and it has also been advertising its ability to batter, blockade, and maybe invade Taiwan regularly. A significant number of officials in the United States think that the likelihood of conflict is increasing. William Burns, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, has stated that Xi wants to have the power to conquer Taiwan by the year 2027. As China's economy continues to struggle, some observers, including, according to reports, analysts from the United States intelligence community, are looking for indications that a peak China would change its behavior to divert attention away from its internal issues or to secure advantages, while it still has the opportunity to do so. The threat of a Chinese attack, according to the opinions of other observers, is exaggerated, an echo of a longer-standing argument that China will not upend a status quo that has served it well. Some academics believe that the threat can likely be controlled as long as Washington does not antagonize Beijing. Their statement is an example of this reasoning. Since it invaded Vietnam in 1979, China has not been responsible for starting a war, according to some people. However, many discount the possibility that China would engage in armed conflict as a reaction to a faltering economy and other domestic issues, arguing that China has no previous experience with diversionary military operations. Confidence in the fundamental continuity of Chinese behavior is what ties these arguments together. This conviction is based on the notion that a nation that has not started a war that has been disastrous in more than 4 decades is significantly less likely to do so today. According to our assessment, this self-assurance is gravely misguided. The conditions of a country have a significant impact on the conduct of that country, and China's circumstances are undergoing rapid transformations. This is true even more so than the strategic tradition of the country. In the field of political science and history, a wide variety of elements have been identified as factors that influence the likelihood of conflict between major countries. When these 4 criteria are taken into consideration, it becomes abundantly evident that many of the conditions that once made it possible for a peaceful rise to occur may today be favoring a violent decline. To begin, China's territorial disputes and other issues that it is disputing are becoming less amenable to compromise or peaceful resolution than they were in the past. This has resulted in China's foreign policy becoming a zero-sum game. The second point is that the military balance in Asia is evolving in ways that could lead Beijing to have an overly optimistic outlook regarding the outcome of potential conflicts. Thirdly, while China's military prospects in the short term are improving, the country's long-term strategic and economic picture is becoming more gloomy. This is a combination that has frequently resulted in revisionist powers becoming more violent in the past. Xi Jinping has transformed China into a personalist dictatorship, which is a type of government that is particularly prone to making catastrophic errors in judgment and engaging in costly wars. This does not mean that China would invade Taiwan in a specific week, month, or year according to this information. Because one of the most common causes of conflict is an unexpected crisis, it is impossible to precisely predict when a dispute will take place. Even though we now know that Europe was on the verge of war in 1914, it is quite possible that World War I would not have occurred at that time if the driver of the car that was transporting Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria had not made one of the most tragic mistakes in the history of the world. Wars are more comparable to earthquakes in that we are unable to predict with absolute certainty when they will occur. Nonetheless, we can identify the components that contribute to higher or lower levels of risk. China's risk indicators are now flashing red at this moment. The likelihood of a war between the United States and China may appear to be low at first glance. For the past 44 years, Beijing has not been involved in a major war, and its military has not been responsible for the deaths of a significant number of foreigners since 1988, when Chinese frigates engaged in a fight over the Spratly Islands and murdered 64 Vietnamese sailors with machine guns. Based on Chinese peace, the so-called Asian peace, which refers to the absence of interstate warfare in East Asia since 1979, has been maintained. Beijing has utilized both military and paramilitary assets to expand its sphere of influence in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. The absence of conflict has not meant anything more than the absence of aggression. China and India have been involved in several violent conflicts over the past few years. Despite this, Chinese leaders have been able to assert that their nation is pursuing a one-of-a-kind peaceful road to global supremacy, since Beijing has refrained from participating in significant wars. Whereas the United States has been involved in several wars, it forces people who are concerned about the conflict to explain why China, which has seen record-breaking growth made possible by 2 generations of peace, would reverse its direction in such a dramatic manner. It would not be the first time that a rising force that appeared to be peaceful turned out to be violent. Between the years 1914 and 1914, Germany had not been involved in a major war for more than 40 years. During the 1920s, Japan signed treaties that pledged to limit its fleet, share power in Asia, and protect China's territorial integrity. Many foreign observers view Japan as a responsible partner during this period. At the beginning of the 21st century, Russian President Vladimir Putin entertained the idea of merging with NATO and bringing Russia closer to the West. That each of these nations, despite their differences, went on to wage savage wars of conquest highlights a fundamental reality. Things are always changing. The same nation can behave in a range of various ways, even to a significant degree, depending on the circumstances. Finally, China had very little opportunities to conquer other countries. Even though China's economic and diplomatic influence was growing, it was evident that the country's military was unable to seize regions that were still in dispute, the majority of which were located at sea. Considering that China's Air Force and Navy were in a pitiful state before the 2000s, an invasion of Taiwan would have been equivalent to a million-man swim, and a naval conflict with Japan's advanced forces might have been resolved in a couple of hours. Of the utmost importance, it is reasonable to anticipate that the United States will put an end to Chinese aggressiveness in maritime Asia. Having witnessed the United States military's utter destruction of the Iraqi military during the Gulf War, the leaders of China were tempted to adopt Deng's adage to conceal their light and bide their time. Thanks for watching. Kindly like and subscribe for more videos. In the comments section of the post, please tell me how many you discovered.